tardes, good afternoon. Happy September 16th, Mexican Independence Day. Just came back from a staff luncheon with the Diversity and Inclusion Group. It was very well attended, and I had myself some delicious shrimp tacos. So for all those who are interested in what I had for lunch. But with that, I want to welcome you all and call this meeting to order. For the Public Safety Committee today for September 16th, 1 p.m. here at Sandag. What I'd like to do before we get started, I'd like to ask our interpreter to be introduced and walk us through how to access our interpretation services for our meeting today.
Thank you. If you are joining us today in the Sandag boardroom and need interpretation into Spanish, please check out a receiver from the receptionist on the 8th floor. Simply hold the earpiece to your ear and the interpreter will come on automatically. Si se ha unido a la reunión de hoy en la sala de juntas de Sandag y necesita interpretación al español, por favor diríjase a la recepción del piso 8 y solicite un receptor. Simplemente sostenga el auricular junto a su oído y la interpretación comenzará automáticamente. The following announcement is for remote participants, and I will repeat this message in English. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, que es el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular o tableta, presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. To use the interpreting feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are located and click on the interpretation icon, which is the world, then select your language. If you are joining the Zoom mobile app using a Zoom mobile app on a cell phone or tablet, please press the ellipses, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And before we get going, let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all stand. Right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. 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 All right, I'll ask that our clerk please take roll.
Chief and Sheriff's Association Seat A, Chief K.
Present.
Chief Sheriff's Association Seat B, Chief Armijo.
Present.
City of San Diego Vice Chair Campillo.
Present.
County of San Diego. Absent. San Diego County District Attorney, Deputy Chief Holmes.
Present.
East County Council Member Goebel.
Present.
Regional Fire Emergency Medical Assistant, Chief McKeed. McKeed?
Is that a Chief McQueed?
McQueed.
Sorry. Yeah, present.
North County Coastal is absent. North County Inland, Councilmember Musgrove.
Present.
San Diego Police Department, Assistant Chief Conley.
Present.
San Diego County Sheriff, Under Sheriff Martinez.
Present.
South County Chair Sotelo Solis.
Sotelo Solis, present.
For advisory members, County Public Safety, Denise Huffins.
Present.
Department of Defense. Absent.
Just call the regional transit that's here.
And Regional Transit, Karen
Tuholsky, present.
Dolsky. Thank you.
That concludes roll. All right, well, welcome everybody. Great to see you all. I think I'm gonna go like this and be like, oh yeah, that's that person. You know, because we've all seen each other for the last 2 years on Zoom, but we're very excited to have you all here in person. I'd like to remind everyone about our process for both member and public comments. So members can raise their hands to speak at appropriate points on our agenda. For members of the public, from individuals who are present at the Sandag meeting, will be taken first. Again, we want to do people first, and then those who are virtual. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak on an item virtually, please use the raised hand icon on the Zoom toolbar, and once we reach that item on the agenda, you will be addressed. And if you are on the phone, please press *9 if you'd like to comment on an item. I would also like to invite Mr. Donovan and Mr. Anderson to introduce themselves, and Tim Kuran to also say hello. Go ahead.
Supervisor Anderson. I believe I'm a voting member of this committee.
You sure are. That's why we want to make sure that we have you present and accounted for. All right, who else? Donovan?
Hi, I'm Mike Donovan, councilman from Coronado. I'm the alternate for Mayor Sotelo Solis.
Tim Kuran. I always make him, I make him Latino, so.
Tim Kern from San Diego MTS, Public Security.
Excellent. And so since we are in the building, and for many, this is their first time, this is the way the chair does identify who is in our speaker queue. So if you want to speak, you hit the 0, you get your little remote control here and you hit the number 0. That way I know that you really, really, really want to speak on an item. And then when we actually vote, it's green, you hit the number 1 for yes, 2 for no, or 3 to abstain. We'll do a tutorial later. There'll be a quiz in order to leave. But we want to make sure that everybody knows, since this is the first time.
Apologies, Chair. This is Sandag Production. Actually, the speaker queue is only Board of Directors, so PSC will just be your attention.
Well,
by
then
hand.
how about that? You guys get it so
Apologies.
much more easy. I thought you guys were going to have to go through the whole, so we're not using the. No, ma'am. Boo. Well, how about I request that we use the thing? How about that? All right, so you guys are off the hook for that, okay? So just raise your hand, boo. All right, with that, we will move on to item 1 on our agenda. And I'd like to request that if there are any member or public comments regarding any issues not on today's agenda, we ask that you please hit *9 or hit the raised hand feature on your Zoom. Linda, do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on public comment? No public comment. Okay. I'm sorry? Is there any public comment, general public comment, as somebody's walking and a speaker slips? We want to make sure. Is this on an item? Item 9. Okay. Moving on from public comment, are there any non-agenda items that any of the members would like to share? Go ahead, Mr. Gold.
Thank you, Chair. It's not an agenda item, so we can't have a discussion, but the governor's executive order dealing with all passenger vehicles be electric by 2035. I read the order and I don't see any exemptions for public safety vehicles. So, for instance, in our city of El Cajon, our police cars are used 24 hours a day. You do a 12-hour shift, the next person comes on, does it for 12 hours. But if that car has to go into battery charging, we're going to have to increase our fleet, as many of you might. And so this may be an item for the Chief and Sheriff's Association or for Sandag staff to find out. So what's the status of fire engines and police cars and Bearcats and all sorts of things that are electrified? My understanding is even fire trucks that are electric today have a diesel generator as a backup for the water supply as well, which kind of defeats the purpose somewhat of electric. So from a public safety point of view, region-wide, we may need to increase our infrastructure and our fleet size if indeed we do not get an exemption for public safety vehicles. So that might be something either staff or chief or sheriffs could investigate for us. Thank you.
Really good question there. Thank you for bringing that up. We'll now move on to item 2, and it's an agency report. And Dr. Cindy Burke, the Senior Director of Data Science for Sandag, will present an update on key programs, projects, and our agency initiatives.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to see everybody back in person. I think this may be, we had one little meeting in there, but I think other than that, this is the first time since 2020. So it's great to see you here, and we've been dark for a few months. Sandag staff's been busy, so I have a big, long update for you all. A few weeks ago, the Air Resources Board certified the 2021 regional plan and confirmed its compliance with state and federal guidelines. And that's important because if we don't have that regional plan in place, we're not eligible for bringing dollars into the region, millions of dollars that continue to flow here. That help us with the Youth Opportunity Pass. For those of you who may not know, it's the free transit pass for youth. Losian rail realignment, the moving the tracks and dealing with the Del Mar Bluffs, and our Otay Mesa East port of entry, which is going to be an exciting port of entry, as you know, which is also, again, tying things with public safety and transportation together. Also, as requested by our board leadership, we will be bringing an item to the board at its meeting next Friday, the 23rd, with options to remove the road user charge, our local road user charge, or RUC, while continuing to meet all applicable federal and state laws, including state greenhouse gas targets and CEQA. So we are going to be responsive to the board direction on that, and that will be at our board meeting next week. You may have also seen in the news that Sandag recently received $300 million for the Losian rail realignment project, which we're very excited about. And this investment fully funds project development to complete our preliminary design and environmental work and to begin our public outreach engagement this fall. We couldn't be more excited to move forward on this critical project for the region. This is another project that's been talked about for years, and now we're making it happen. Another a priority project for Sandag that we're excited to have broken ground on is the Otay Mesa East Port of Entry. On August 31st, Sandag and Caltrans welcomed U.S. Senator Alex Padilla for a tour of SR 11, Otay Mesa, and we were just awarded with Caltrans $150 million through the U.S. Department of Transportation Infra Grant Program to construct that port of entry. So the groundbreaking has happened. Were you there, Chair? The Otay Mesa groundbreaking?
I was not.
Okay.
I was not.
But very excited for that to be happening. We're also extremely grateful to Senator Padilla, Congressman Vargas, and all of our regional leaders who worked to make this happen. The next milestone for this project will be signing the revenue sharing agreement with our Mexican partners to bolster our financial commitment on both sides of the border. On October 14th, we're going to be having a special joint meeting of all of the policy committees here at Sandag, and we're hoping that you will be able to join us there as we seek the board's approval for that important agreement. And other exciting news, Sunday, October 9th, Sandag will be hosting a family-friendly community fair at Rucko Park near Seaport Village to highlight the projects and plans we're delivering throughout the San Diego region. I'm sure you all have read our regional plan from front to end. Yes, Chuck, okay, you have read that? Well, then if you haven't and you'd like to find out more about our regional plan as well as engage with a we're doing a Shark Tank-like exercise that are going to highlight Sandag's request for innovative concepts and provide the 3 finalists an opportunity to unveil their ideas publicly and actively receive input from community members. It's going to be an exciting day with food trucks, potentially jumpies. Do you know if we're having jumpies again? If it's jumpies, it's a good party. But we're excited to welcome the community there. During October, Sandag is also participating in Rideshare Week from October 3rd through 9th, not to be confused with Restaurant Week, but also equally important. We encourage individuals to take the pledge to participate by sharing the ride through alternative modes of transportation. I also want to note that in the wake of the tragic loss of 4 people who were killed while biking in the San Diego region last month, Sandag received a letter from San Diego County Bicycle Coalition and several other community groups calling for renewed commitment to Vision Zero and short-term actions to increase safety for our region's most vulnerable road users. So definitely another item, an issue as we look at both public safety and transportation and how do we make the roads safe for everybody as we hopefully reduce single occupancy vehicles on the street. We appreciate their advocacy for safer streets throughout the San Diego region, and we share their commitment to Vision Zero for the region. We're working on a Vision Zero action plan for the region now and taking steps along the way to do everything we can to make our roadways safer for all users. Work on the airport connection to the Central Mobility Hub also continues. We recently reconvened the Central Mobility Hub Community Roundtable with small groups of stakeholders representing different community planning groups to update them on the project's downtown focus. And last week, we held a virtual public meeting to educate and answer questions from the public on the Central Mobility Hub project. And building off our success with the grand opening of the Mid-Coast Corridor last November, hopefully all of you have been able to see or ride the Blue Line trolley up to UCSD. Sandag's also working on a pilot for a new Pacific Beach shuttle or neighborhood electric vehicle to provide new clean travel connections to the Balboa Avenue Transit Station and for short trips within the community. This sort of pilot is something we hope to do throughout the region by partnering with your jurisdictions over the next few years. And speaking of the Mid-Coast Trolley Project, Sandag has refinanced its outstanding Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act TIFIA loan for the Mid-Coast project by securing a replacement loan, which will save the San Diego region more than $123 million during the life of the 25-year loan. And our work on housing also continues. Obviously, homelessness and some of those issues is a big public safety issue also. We've received approval from the California Housing and Community Development on our Regional Early Action Plan 2.0 early application. This means we can use 10% of our $43 million allocation to start outreach and education to develop our regional housing program. Staff also, I told you we were busy. Staff also recently kicked off a regional anti-displacement strategy and an early implementation action of the 2021 regional plan. This work is essential to the agency's commitment to equity and holding ourselves accountable, that the projects we build and support are not negatively impacting communities by our actions or inactions. And we also recently updated the Sandag Language Assistance Plan. This document outlines the agency's measures to assist people with limited English proficiency. And finally, and this is what I'm very excited about, the Data Science Department launched our agency's first open data portal, or ODP, last Tuesday, opendata.sandag.org. And in the coming months, ODP will replace Data Surfer, which has housed our estimates and forecast data for the region, and will also be home to public safety data potentially, with ARGIS data coming on there, de-identified, but having our NIBRS, CYBERS dashboard on that platform, having big data sets, GIS data sets, and other portals. Staff's also working on creating a mobility data clearinghouse and a housing policy and planning tool on the portal. That concludes my report, Chair.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burke. Again, a lot of very positive things happening here with the Sandag staff, as well as many of the things that we've been able to accomplish as a board. Before we move forward, are there any members of the public wishing to address us on item 2?
There are no public commenters for this item.
Thank you. Any questions from our committee members? Seeing none, this was for discussion only and information. So we'll now move on to item 3. And with that, it's an approval of meeting minutes. If a member of the public would like to make a comment on the meeting minutes, please raise your hand now. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
No public comment.
Okay.
Chair, would you like a motion?
Yes, sir.
And a
You
second.
got it.
I got a motion from Member Anderson, second from Campillo. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll. Oh, pues. No, que we weren't going to vote. Okay, so now you're voting on your clickers. See, yay. Ask and you shall receive. So 1 is yes, 2 is no, 3 is for abstention. And then it actually says that they received your vote, and you can actually see it up there. District Attorney, Fire, EMS, and North County Coastal, you're missing.
I think Coastal's not here.
Coastal's not here? Yeah. Okay. Yay.
And that item passes. Those
Outstanding.
members present.
Okay, with that, we will now move on to item 5. Thank you again so much. And I'm sorry, item 4. Item 4 is going to be presented by Chief K.
Good afternoon. I'd first like to acknowledge that Chief Ed Varso has moved on from the city of Escondido, has taken a position up in Menifee. We're very much missed. A few meetings to catch up on. We had our Chief Sheriff's Management Committee meeting on June 1st. There was a Public Safety Committee update presented by Interim ARGIS Director Craig Carter, provided an overview of items from May 20th, 2022. We had an update on the ARGIS Strategic Plan from Craig Carter, who presented the update. An update on the California Incident-Based Reporting System, or CYBERS, from Craig Carter on the progress made on the CYBERS project. In addition, he discussed an OTS grant that offered through the Office of Transportation and Safety. The grant would provide a method to electronically report accident data to the state. Chief Varso directed the staff to pursue this opportunity. And from the Business Working Group, Craig Carter presented an update on the March 12th, 2022 and April 19th working group meetings. On July 6th, we were dark. August 3rd, we were dark. September 7th, there was a meeting. There was an update from Principal Technology Program Manager Paul Mendez. He presented on overview of suggested changes to the ARGIS Joint Powers Agreement. In addition, Mr. Mendez presented an overview on proposed revisions to the ARGIS fee structure. And both of these updates will be also provided here by ARGIS staff.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any questions regarding that presentation? No? All right. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on item 4?
No public comments on item 4.
Thank you so much. With that, that was for information only. We will now move on to item 5, and this is a report from the County Chiefs Association. Chief McQueen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dave McQueen. I'm the Fire Chief of Rancho Santa Fe. I'm also the Vice President with San Diego County Fire Chiefs, and I'm your liaison. With that being said, we do have a new executive team for the San Diego County Fire Chiefs Association, and that was as of July 1 of 22. You have President Fire Chief Chris Brainer from San Miguel, Vice President, that's myself, as Fire Chief for Rancho Santa Fe. Secretary is Fire Chief Mike Sims from Bonita. Treasurer is Fire Chief Brian Boglin from Alpine, and member at large is Fire Chief Tony Mitra from CAL FIRE. You also have a new San Diego County Op Area Coordinator, and that's going to be Fire Chief Dan Barron from San Marcos. Right now, as we speak, we're working on the County Consolidated Fire Code, which has been reviewed and revised and is waiting for approval and adoption by December of 22. Then it'll go into effect on January of 23. And this is a process that is completed every 3 years with the collaboration of county fire agencies and fire prevention. Obviously, it's no news to all of you, but fire season is all year round and it is in full swing. We've been on the McKinney fire. You guys are fully aware of the Board 32 fire down in Lake Marina area. Fairview fire up in Temecula location, and now we've got resources moving into the Mosquito fire and up into Cedar Creek fire, which is actually in Oregon. So we do a lot of mutual aid. The excessive heat, we also worked with CalES to approve pre-post strike teams. These are strike team resources that are fire related, and just in case we have other fires that break out beyond the ones that are already currently going, these resources are able to jump on the incidents fairly quick and hopefully mitigate the issue. Hurricane K, we stood up several swiftwater teams along with other resources that were activated throughout San Diego County just for the anticipated rain totals and the wind damage that was anticipated by the National Weather Service, but we'll leave it at that. And then the hiring shortage, I'm sure many of you guys have heard this. Both fire, police, and many agencies are seeing a hiring shortage or a lack of interest getting into these fields. So this is going to have a large impact on how we mitigate both crime and fire. End of report.
Thank you so much, Chief. And I would agree. All markets right now are definitely looking for good quality employees. And if any of you all are looking for a second job, MTS I know is looking for 65 drivers, bus drivers. So if you want to take on a second or third job, I know that we do have opportunities there. And it's always just really interesting. We talk about, competitive pay. We talk about workplace and environment. And there's just all of these elements that now make this definitely an employee market, but it makes it for public institutions to be able to provide those job opportunities and incentives. We're all competing with each other, unfortunately, to give the biggest prize, but National City can do that for anyone who is interested, so you know. But I think that's, you know, needless to say, there's a lot of things going on in the market. But thank you for that update. We'll now ask if there are any members of the public wishing to address us on this item. I think I asked that, but we'll do it again.
No public comments on this item.
Any Public Safety Committee members? Do we have a queue? Anybody? Okay, nobody. All right, with that, we'll now move on to item 6, and I'll ask Dr. Burke to introduce Dr. Octavio Rodriguez Ferreira, who will be presenting on this item.
I'm very excited to introduce to you Dr. Rodriguez. He has been on some of our Public Safety Committee meetings, but this is the first time he's been at the dais with us. Dr. Rodriguez comes from USD. Because one degree wasn't enough, he has both a JD and a PhD. And we're very excited to have him on leading our criminal justice research division that I was in, and then Sandy Keaton was in, and we took some time to find the right person. So he will be working closely with you all.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm honored to present before this committee for the first time. I've seen some of you in some of our meetings, but this is my first opportunity to address you, so I'm very excited and very honored. As a reminder for the committee, each grant funding opportunity that the Criminal Justice Research Division is presented to the PSC Chair and Board of Directors for approval. Grants of more than $300,000 per year require PSC or Board approval, depending on the amount. This grant that I'll be presenting right now and the following one do not require approval for acceptance, but we are presenting them to keep this committee up to date and on PSE projects to be transparent about what our staff is working on. So item 6 is brought to the committee as an information item. Item 6 is a CalVIP evaluation grant with Chula Vista Police Department. This is a grant by the California Board of State and Community Corrections, BSCC, through the California Violence Intervention Program, CalVIP. Sandag will work with the Chula Vista Police Department and SBCS, or South Bay Community Services, and they will implement strategies to interrupt cycles of violence and retaliation. Such strategies will include community outreach and focus deterrent strategies. Sandag will serve as the outside evaluator and will conduct a process and outcome evaluation to measure how the project was implemented and what effect it had on the target population. And just to provide some background, Sandag has successfully partnered with both Chula Vista Police Department and SBCS on numerous projects and will provide its expertise in the area of action research. The fiscal year 2023 overall work program, or OWP, and its budget will be amended to accept the $52,490 in state funding. And that concludes our report on item 6. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Do we have any member of Chula Vista or of our police departments wanting to add any details or any other information on why this funding is so important? No, everybody's really shy today. Okay, so with that, do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
No public comments on this item.
Again, this is for the Cal VIP grant program for the city of Chula Vista. And when will that start?
Well, it will start in the next 2 months. We have already meeting with our partners. We have, in fact, a meeting next week. And as soon as they start with their activities, we will start developing our evaluation plan.
Okay, sounds good. And were there any, there were no members of the public, any of our PSC members wishing to address us on this item? Seeing none, this was for information only, but again, a good reminder of opportunities for the ways in which our jurisdictions can partner with Sandag to administer these types of evaluations and data collection. We'll keep you on the line, Dr. Rodriguez, and you have item 7.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, this item is for information only, and it's about a new grant for a Proposition 47 county program evaluation. The County of San Diego recently received Proposition 47 funding from the Board of State and Community Corrections, BSCC, to implement a program for low-level offenders with a history of housing stability. The county program aims to improve outcomes and reduce recidivism for persons exiting custody with behavioral health diagnoses who face significant barriers to accessing services and are at high risk of poor outcomes and being homeless or lost to follow-up care upon release. For this project, Sandag will be conducting a process and impact evaluation for the county. And as part of this evaluation, Sandag will create a local evaluation plan. We'll document how the program's implemented. We'll measure outcomes related to success and compile lessons learned for replication. Again, to provide some background, we were asked to conduct this evaluation based on our experience in a previous Proposition 47 project that we released a couple of years ago. And of course, we have successfully partnered with the county in other important evaluations, such as the Alternatives to Incarceration Project. For this, the fiscal year 2023 Sandag Overall Work Program, or OWP, and its budget will be amended to accept $85,000 in funding from the county. That concludes our report on item 7. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Now, again, all these data sets are going to be really important as we move forward for all areas of the public safety community. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
No public comments.
Okay, thank you again so much. For information only, again, letting folks know how we can partner in data collection for individual municipalities. This actually, the last 2 items, again, are continue to be for information only, but I really want to, it was alluded to in one of the presentations earlier, or updates. This is the update on joint powers agreement and the ARGIS fee structure. We'll kick it over to Paul Mendez from Sandag, and staff will provide an update on the joint powers agreement and this fee structure. It was for information only, but anytime we talk about fees, everybody tends to perk up because this is how, one, we cover the costs associated, but also two, how we get that information to our respective communities. As Paul gets set up, do we have any members of the public? We'll do it after the presentation. I'll ask you afterwards.
No public comments.
Okay.
Everyone?
No. Can we turn his mic on?
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Mendez. I'm the Principal Technology Program Manager for Sandag. I've been here for about 4 months, and today I'm going to give you an update on where we're at with the amendment and the update of our joint powers agreement and the ARGIS fee structure. So today we're going to talk about the joint powers agreement. For those of you who are unfamiliar, it started back in 1980 and predates pretty much everybody in this room. We'll talk about the status of the new draft, and we'll talk about the all-important fee structure. We're also going to go through some naming conventions, the terms that we'll be using in the new JPA, the charter member agencies, the contributing member agencies, and the user agencies. But first, we're going to take a little trip down memory lane, and we're going to go back into the history of ARGIS. ARGIS, the Automated Regional Justice Information System, was conceived in 1980. That was 42 years ago. It was cutting edge during its time. There was nothing in California or pretty much anywhere in the nation that had entities like yourselves able to get together and combine their data and share their data amongst each other with little or no inconvenience, bickering, or anything like that. That's something that San Diego should be proud of. The people in this room, we work together, we get together, we collaborate, and that's really not always the case in many of the communities in California. In fact, in 42 years, even though Sandag was cutting edge then, it's still cutting edge today. There's still not that many entities, communities that have this type of data sharing entity that exists. So it was governed by the city of San Diego and administered by the San Diego Police Department in 1980. In 2004, the governance and administration of Argus was transferred to Sandag. And this committee, the Public Safety Committee, was initiated right around that time, and it replaced the Argus Board of Directors. A few other policies at Sandag also came into light, board policy number 2 and board policy number 26, which I'll be referring to later in the presentation. And in 2016, the data sharing MOU was executed to outline the Argus roles and responsibilities regarding how the data was shared, and it was signed by all the member agencies. Remember, in 1980, it was pretty much only the charter member agencies that were sharing data, and there were no user agencies. Now, and that's about 19 of you, some of you not here today, but most of you are. At this point in 2016, we had an excess of 50 additional agencies that would plug into Argus, mine the data, use the data for their analysis or for their investigations, and then they would unplug. So we had to come up with a data sharing MOU. And the data sharing MOU has a lot of language in it, as they normally always do, but the most important parts were the security of the data, making sure that there were ACCs or agency CLETS coordinators that made sure only the legitimate people were accessing the data, and all the rules and repercussions that follow that, because obviously the data is very sensitive. So it was signed by all the member agencies. On the left side of the slide, you can see the hierarchy. You guys are number 2 in batting order up there, and the chiefs and sheriffs are number 3, as Chief Kay mentioned earlier. This presentation, minus a few nuts and bolts, was presented to the chiefs and sheriffs last week. And so this should be no news for them. Underneath it, you have some of the business working groups. For those of you that are not familiar with Argus, there are 3 working groups, or actually 4 here. The business working group, which is the most active, the NIBRS one, which is a working group that is specific to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and then there are a couple of ad hoc user groups. One of them is the user group, and one of them is the technical group. Both of those are kind of defunct right now. It's my wish that when the new Argus director takes over, we'll be stimulating the reactivation of both of those groups. So the original JPA was written in 1980, and it was amended in 1990, 1998, and in 2004. In 2004, as I mentioned previously, that's when the whole governance of Argus was moved over to Sandag. 2004 was 18 years ago. We're still using the same document today to govern Argus. It's long in the tooth. It needs to be replaced. I should say it needed to be replaced. One of the specific jobs that I was brought on to Sandag for was to get the JPA and the fee structure dialed in and scored away and ready to present to you. And we're almost there. And today's just an update for you to let you know where we're at. So, obviously, there are several steps that have to go forward before we do it, but we're hoping to have the new JPA effective January 1st, 2023, or following the approval. There are a lot of entities that have to put their eyes on this. There are 19 entities that I counted, and their legal counsel. So we know this is going to take a little while, but it's September, and maybe we can get through and try to meet this deadline. Right now, the JPA is in its final draft. It's over at Sandag Legal at the senior levels, and it needs to get a once-over from them before it's approved. Once it's approved, I'll be taking it hopefully to the Chiefs and Sheriffs Management Committee next month for their green light, and then back to this group. What changes did we make to the JPA, the 18-year-old JPA? So first thing we did is, remember I had mentioned that that's when the whole thing got transferred from the city of San Diego to Argus. So what we did is there's a whole bunch of legalese and references into there that talk about Argus is going to do this. They're going to establish this account, and they're going to do this type of auditing, and they're going to do this and that. And it was a lot of going to do. Well, they've been doing it for 18 years. So all of that language has been cleaned up to just essentially be condensed and say Sandag will continue this governance that they do. Took out about 3 or 4 pages. New naming conventions to match the 2016 MOU for use and access to the regional data. So when 2016 came around, they had new naming conventions. Most of those naming conventions match Board Policy 2 and Board Policy 26. Both of these kind of came to fruition right around the 2004 date. And granted, they've been amended a few times since then, but we want to have the same name for the same features and the same groups throughout all 4 of those documents. And these changes do that. The fee structure. So in the old JPA from 2004, the fee structure was written on page 4 on the top half of the page. It addressed the charter member agencies, the 19 entities, the plank members that started Argus. Didn't talk anything about the user agencies, which there are now 50 of. Oh, don't worry, they're getting billed, but there's no memorialization. There's nothing inside the JPA that talks about how we're going to bill them or that we're even going to bill them. We just do it now and then they pay. So that has been removed from the JPA. It's still part of the JPA, but it is now an amendment. The reason why I decided to go in this direction was because now as we make subtle or minor changes or even major changes based off of the direction that the new Argus director wants to go in, we change the amendment. We don't have to go back and change this whole JPA and get all 19 people to sign it and get your mayors and your city council members and your board of supervisors to sign it. We make changes to the amendment and we move forward. And once again, we went ahead and tried to align a lot of the naming conventions to be consistent with board policy number 2 and board policy number 26. So these are the new naming conventions. The original plank members, the 19, are now the charter member agencies. They're the original 10 law enforcement agencies and the 9 cities that contract with the Sheriff's Department for law enforcement services. So Sheriff Martinez, it's going to be the Sheriff's Department with its unincorporated areas. That's one of the charter agencies, and then the other 9 cities that you provide services for that are incorporated, and they're all separate entities. Contributing member agencies, I'm going to get back to that in a minute, and user agencies. These are the ones I mentioned earlier. They plug into Argus, they mine the data, they use the data, and then they leave. So my boss asked me the other day, why do you have contributing member agencies as a title in here? Well, let's talk about why I did that and what it really constitutes. All the charter member agencies are contributing member agencies. They contribute data that goes into the Argus, and that's what we share. The user agencies, not so much. Almost all the user agencies do not contribute data. They plug in, they get their stuff, and they move on. But there are a few user agencies that are contributing member agencies. MTS is one of them. Probation is one of them. The district attorney's office is one of them. San Diego State is one of them. And the reason why we have this is kind of planning for the future. Every time we get someone else on board that can give us their data, that enhances, you can't put a price on what that does for Argus, how much better Argus is because of it. This makes the world smaller for criminals. This makes it easier to identify victims when we have victims, when we maybe don't know who they are. When MTS cuts a bunch of citations for fare evasion, that tells us where someone is, what time, what date, and what location. It's as good as a field interview card. And that, as an investigator, as a former law enforcement official of over 30 years of experience with over half an investigative assignments, that is gold to me. That's gold to me. That tells me that makes the world smaller for the criminals. So when the San Diego State starts putting in their data and we learn about people that are arrested, the crimes they have, that makes all of our walls and all of our silos get lower. Probation gives us their ONS or officer notification systems, and the DA's office is also contributing data. So we have the label so that in the future, when agencies who are user agencies become contributing member agencies, perhaps there is some value in offering them a discount, encouraging them to contribute their data. CHP, who's not here today, we are dying to get their data. That would just make Argus so much richer. And we'll work on that. The new director and I will work on that to try to get that to happen. But in the future, we may want to offer a discount to them using that label. So there have been no increases since 2004 for the charter member agencies. On page 4 of the old 2004 JPA, it talked about using the population data from 2004, and that's been the billing ever since. There haven't been any increases. In fact, the previous director, Pam Scanlon, a wonderful woman who took Argus to the place where it is now, made reductions in 2007 and 2008 when we had significant downfall in our economy. You all remember the 2007, and she left those values lower for many years, up until like 14 or 15, even though the economy had recovered. And then she went back up to the 2004. So there has to be a change and there has to be an increase. So we're going to use, if approved, the 2020 census population data. Well, there have been other questions that I'll try to answer before you ask them, which is why don't we use population data every year? Why don't we use the Bureau of Finance's, California Bureau of Finance's data or Sandag estimates? The chiefs and sheriffs specifically asked for some stability. They knew that increases were coming. They knew that this isn't sustainable operating in 2004. So we tried to do it so that for planning purposes, for their budgets, for your budgets, they could look at the population data isn't going to change until 2030. So that number doesn't change. And once we know what the budget is, simple math with a calculator is going to give you a pretty rough number that's fairly accurate on what your standard basic package would be. That's why it was done. So there's a split here. The charter member agencies are going to be billed utilizing the 2020 census data to determine the population. Of the Argus budget, this is about 60%. The user member agencies that don't have a population that can be easily counted shall be billed utilizing the number of user accounts. We're currently sitting at about 5,400 active user accounts. We're not talking about disabled accounts, suspended accounts, people that left and your ACCs didn't clean it up. These are active user accounts. Argus can determine which ones are active. So they are going to be billed about 40% of what the Argus budget is, based off the number of users that they have. So these fees are going to take care of the basic or standard Argus user package. It includes the network, which also allows you connectivity to CLETS, the DMV, all of our network access, and our application tools. Now, Argus is here to serve. So when we get a call from your agencies, we respond. We don't tell you it's not our job. If we can help you and we can fix it, that's what we do. That's Argus. Argus is here to serve. In 2018, for example, the Port District had a catastrophic failure of their network, and they were down for 6 months. Those of you that wear the uniform in this room know that when Argus goes down, when the network goes down, police work stops. It kind of grinds to a halt. Nobody really wants to do a lot of proactive law enforcement, knowing that they're stopping and giving someone a citation for speeding when that person could be a homicide suspect that they can't identify because the network's down and they can't run them. So it's important to have it. Argus went out and scrounged up every mobile device that we had, and we gave it to the Harbor Police. We gave all of their officers one of those devices, and they had a network to respond to for 6 months until they got their own network under control. That's what Argus does. Argus serves. Did we charge them? Did we give them a fee? No, we didn't do that. We just did it because it was the right thing to do. Many of you have called for work on your networks, your firewalls, your servers, and we have the people that know how to work with those, and we've done it. Some of you are paying for your cell phones all the way, your VPN licenses, your LTEs, and some aren't, and we're just making it work. But from this point forward, we can't be quite that nice. We're just gonna have to start billing per activity that you want. You need to increase speeds, we can give it to you, but we're gonna have to charge a little bit for that. And we're not gonna charge to make money off of you. Argus is not a money-making entity. We just need it to stay solvent so that we can move and function and move forward. So the next steps. Legal will continue the review and hopefully get back to me shortly to let me know that it's been completed and there are no further changes. We're going to pitch this to the chiefs and sheriffs. After that, it comes to this body for review and recommendations for approval, I hope. Presentation to the board for review and approval. And then it'll go to all of your signatories to have them look at it, their legal counsel, and approve it. And then hopefully we can get it approved and implemented by July 1st in alignment with your fiscal years, except for the federal partners who started in October. That's the end of my presentation. I'd like to think that there are some questions for me. I think I know this material pretty well. I'd like to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you again so much, Paul. Questions from members of the dais? Mr. Goebel, followed by Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So am I hearing that the population, which is the basis for the fee structure, won't change between 2020 and 2030?
Since we're using census data, the censuses are only taken every 10 years. So whatever the 2020 population was determined for your jurisdiction, that's the number we'll use until 2030.
Okay, so any agencies that gain population over the next 10 years kind of get that free, because the other agencies who don't gain population are essentially subsidizing, because the fees haven't changed, areas that have an increase in population. Is that a fair assumption?
I'm not sure if that's exactly accurate. I think that we can use an annual one, but that takes away the planning portion of what we were trying to accomplish. Sure, I think the predictions are that populations are going to go down throughout, but remember, sir, that the population, as it changes, the budget, approved budget, is what we back into. So the percentage of 60%, which is what the charter members do, whatever the budget is approved is going to be 60%. I suspect that the scrutiny of the budget in April and May that Argus presents is going to get a significant amount of scrutiny, because at that point you'll be able to do the computations and find out. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I guess I'm going to, is it even a material amount? Let's say Agency A has an increase in population of 100,000 because it has a lot of available land or things like that. And Agency Q has very little increase in population because it's built out.
Right.
So Agency A, who gained 100,000, their fee structure isn't going to change till 2030, even though they gained 100,000 in population. And Agency Q is somewhat subsidizing that. I guess I'm asking, is the Argus budget, I don't know what the Argus budget is it even a material percentage change?
So we're looking for this year's approved budget, we're at 6.3 million without our grants. And I used, for purposes of our models, 6.5 million for the 2023, 2024. You're right, because what's happening now is, as we move from the 2004 census data to the 2020 census data, so La Mesa, not that much of a change. Chula Vista, which is now like the state of Tennessee, right? They continue to annex and annex and annex. They'll see the biggest increases because they've had the biggest increases in population.
So they won't see their fees increase till 2030, though, until that population is reflected in the census. Is that correct?
Except for the fact that they're going to take a pretty good hit this time because their expansion has occurred in the past.
Of course.
Right?
No doubt. But going forward,
if they continue to expand, sure.
Yeah, I guess that's, I'm expressing a concern that the areas that grow in population the most over the next 10 years, whether they're incorporated or unincorporated, I don't know how material that is, but there's a fairness question there, whether those that don't grow are subsidizing those that do grow. And that's just my comment for a concern.
No, and
I was going to kick it over to Dr. Berg. She has a clarification as well.
So I think this is a great point, and why we wanted to bring this to you before there was any recommendation for action, because it is kind of knowing what's going on and being able to expect that during the budgeting versus some jurisdictions potentially growing more or less. And so what I'd like to suggest is that when we come back with this item in the future, we do have population forecasts for the region, and we can talk about what Sandag's estimating populations would look like through 2030 to be able to help inform this discussion before something goes up to the board.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, because that will show the materiality of any change. That would be great, the forecast. Thank you.
All right, we'll go with Vice Chair Campillo and then head over to Councilmember Musgrove.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. The former prosecutor in the city attorney's office here in San Diego used ARGIS all the time, understand what an important tool and resource it is for law enforcement. So I'm really glad to see that we're going to be modernizing its use and ultimately putting it on a standardized and understandable fee structure that makes more sense than 40 years ago, 50 years ago, right? So, and I think it's probably safe to say that San Diego is probably going to see the biggest increase in paying if we're one of the original members of this, and now it's going to population. So I'm willing to put in that sacrifice on behalf of my city. So I really do think that as we continue to see this, I'm interested in seeing how these extra concierge services are going to work for separate charges, and seeing how this really plays out over the next 10 years. I think Mr. Goebel brings up some great points, and we're gonna see where this lands, and then 10 years from now another census, and probably maybe make another addendum. This is the first addendum in how long?
18 years.
18 years. So, all right, well, we'll have another addendum in 8 years. So we're cutting the time down for improving this system. Thank you very much for all your hard work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair. Councilmember Musgrove.
Thank you, Chair. As a general rule, the municipal agencies stay within their cities unless there's some request for service or some exigency. But with the sheriff's jurisdictions, quite frequently, deputies in a contract station will move into an unincorporated area. Do we see at some point, I don't know, it's not your job to count all the beans, but at some point, and also maybe for the under, looking at those calls for service to try and tease apart what is actually being generated from, let's say, a contract city within their sphere, because every contract city has an unincorporated section, and 2 of the contract cities actually have their stations based, their primary station based out in the unincorporated area. So there was going to be a lot of crossover, and if the billing is set based on population, it could lead to underbilling and overbilling.
True. And so the sheriff's department is a little tricky on this one because of how you do the business. So I conceive this being as the sheriff's department will get a bill for the unincorporated areas by population. And each of the cities will also get a bill based off of their population. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about this fee structure. This wasn't the first time I threw something up on the board or the second. Here was the biggest challenge. This was the biggest challenge. How do I take you guys from your 2004 billing to 2022? How do I do that without killing your budgets? So the first sets of models that I put up were showing somewhere, for some of you, 6-figure increases. I know that's not palatable. I know it's not palatable. I've worked with budgets myself. So this hybrid is not perfect. It's not even perfect. And I'll tell you about another potential pilot that I'm working on. So this was the best one that I could do that kept the increases mostly reasonable for most everybody. Everybody's going to pretty much get an increase. So that's why I did it this way. I tried doing it just based off the users. And like I said, it was just off the charts for increases. So let's think about this for a minute. I'm just going to take a moment, Madam Chair, to go through this, because I think this might be something that Mr. Goebel will appreciate, and so Mr. Musgrove. If I'm counting users just for the moment, if I'm just counting users, I have a user over here. This is a crime analyst. They live inside of ARGIS. They're in there 5 times a day, every day. They're doing analysis. They're helping their detectives. They are using ARGIS. Then I have Chief K, who's an ARGIS user, and he's in there 3 times a year. He accesses ARGIS 3 times a year because he's got some sensitive investigation into one of his captains or whatever, and he can't let anyone else do it. He has to do it. He accesses it. He knows how to do it. Those are counted as 1 user and 1 user. But is that equitable? See, I don't think it's equitable. So I'm initiating a pilot that will start in 2023 that will try to measure the usage of ARGIS and push out the usage out there to see who's using it the most. That should address the problem over there, Mr. Musgrove.
So I guess the other issue then, and I'm not speaking for the sheriff, but because I was intimately involved in this.
Sure.
Then it comes down to who is accessing and inputting data and where they are physically located, and the data they're inputting may not be for that specific location. Rancho San Diego for Lemon Grove, as a great example, we're a very small city where their support staff may not be physically located with it, and they may be, but you start commingling a lot of data to get it into a system.
That's true. And so that's part of the feasibility of this pilot is, can we measure it? Is there a way? How do we measure it using bandwidth? Or do we use it measuring how many times you hit the clutch switch? And these are things that are frankly above my pay grade because I don't understand the technology that well. But it's something that we have to try to pursue for equality for all of you. Like I said, a user, this is a power user here, and this is a occasional user, and maybe we should try to look at that data and compare it to this fee structure in the next year or two once we have it, if we can in fact measure it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know if, did you have any other clarification?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think this discussion has been really helpful for us to be able to go back as we're finalizing this, so thank you.
And before you go, I actually, I hear what my colleagues are saying. If there's no population growth, it really makes it hard to, see that increase. But just the example that you gave, it does not invalidate the need to have them as individual users. If somebody needs that information, that's what the system was built for. And I would say that it should not matter if you are using it more than once or you have many touch points. I think that it still has a need in the existing communities that are being served by it. So to change that model, I think, I'm going to talk directly to my chief to really see what the impacts will be. I think that it's really important. Again, we're trying to make it as equitable as possible, but you should not be, docked if you do have to use the system, because that's what the system is for. So again, just finding that balance and that happy medium, I think it's going to be really important. Equity in this sense, I don't know what we are basing it on, if it's cost or increase in cost or increase in usage. So I'd be really curious how we as an organization are looking at the term equity in our ARGIS fee structure. So that's hypothetical, but I want to know. Secondly, is there a historical timeline as part of the MOU? Usually we have like an exec summary of, this is kind of the historical perspective of what brought about, this entity. Is that part of it?
I don't know what actually prompted the hiring of myself to redo the JPA. I looked at it, and once I saw it and then started to do the research and find out that, the fees hadn't gone up, I think probably one of the largest pieces of impetus to get this rolling was the fact that ARGIS has dipped into their reserves now. This will be the third year that we'll be dipping into our reserves, and it's not sustainable. And we just can't wait for the wheels to fall off before we try to do some repairs. So I think that's the only timeline that I can actually present.
Right, and I guess, Dr. Burke, having that perspective, because you're here, you're telling us, we've got a little bit of, the bullet points of 2004, 2008, but I think it might be good for context when we're not here, people know what the history of it is. So go ahead.
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, I think for those of us who were here with the prior executive director, she really did keep the fees very low. And we were cognizant when Eric Wood, our last director, was here, that there were these, the fees weren't equitable enough. So I feel like there's two issues here in terms of the fee structure, is making sure that we're bringing enough in to keep it solvent. Again, ARGIS is not a for-profit enterprise by any means. But then the other issue, for example, was because things happened outside maybe a standard decision process, one agency might get cell phones, another agency wouldn't. So we really want to make sure that there's equitability across departments, that someone isn't in a biased way paying for something that another agency is benefiting from just because it kind of happened through a backdoor way. So we want to make sure that's all fair and equitable. And then the second issue is we really want to look at RGIS 2.0. What is RGIS going to look like? When we think about, when you were just doing the presentation, I was thinking, who was president in 2004? What was the top song in 2004? What kind of phone did we have in 2004? So I think it's so important that we really look at our agreements. Technology is changing so quickly. How do we ensure that RGIS is continuing to add value into what we're doing? How are we working with the Sheriff's Department and new CAD systems and new communication systems and the transition from UCR crime reporting to NIBRs and cybers? So I think it's so essential that we're doing all this in a joint way and we're doing it in a transparent way. We know that technology, we want to keep up with it. And I think RGIS has always been known for being ahead with privacy agreements and doing things that way. So we just want to make sure that we're doing this in an open way with the chiefs and your agency. So I think this has been a great discussion for us to bring back before we come back to the chiefs with it, and then ultimately up to the board.
Well, and I think you raised a really good point about the options that are available. You don't know what you don't know. And if we do have an option to upgrade our CAD system or our phone system, hey, I want to know, but it's above our pay grade as the elected officials, because you guys are the ones that, deal with the budgets, and I'm pointing to the chiefs here, that have that as part of their line items. But if we learn about it, then we can share it, say, hey, this is an opportunity. So if we know what that cafeteria, options are, I think that's how it was listed in the presentation. I think it's a good thing as well.
And I could just say one more thing too, that I think is a really unique opportunity about RGIS is being able to leverage, and it's easier to get contracts and do different things and get cost savings when it's a region going for a technology and such. So just to remember how we can utilize RGIS in that way also.
Yes, Mr. Goebel, go ahead.
When it comes to usage fees, you might consider and discuss the methodology followed by utilities, a base charge and then a usage charge. For instance, Chief K and their crime analyst in your examples would both pay the same base charge, but the crime analyst would pay an additional usage charge on that. You might consider the merits of that.
Yes, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I will.
Okay, Chief K.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just add, being a young patrol officer in the 80s, we had RGIS computers at the divisions. We had two, and they were based, I believe, on keystroke fees, and we weren't encouraged to use them. So I think philosophically, RGIS is about leveraging information so that we all contribute to a safer county. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And thank you.
Wow, keystrokes, interesting. Yeah, so again, we want people to give good data in, good data out. Safe means a safer county, agreed. All right, thank you again. Paul, do we have any members of the public wishing to address us on this item?
Yes, we do. We have Tim Balash.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry, we're still on item 8. Thank you. Any members on item 8? No?
No member comments.
Okay, any other thoughts from our team? Seeing none, this was for information. Thank you again, Paul. Now we will move on to item 9. We have Dr. Burke, who will be sharing her thoughts on item 9, and this is for drug use among the arrestee population in San Diego County. And it will be an overview of drug use statistics amongst the arrestee population. And this information is also available at sandag.org/SAM, SAM. Dr. Burke.
So in full transparency, Octavio should be the one doing this presentation, but I was totally selfish and he graciously let me do it because this is going to probably be the last time. This is my favorite project. We could not be doing it without the support of the county and the Sheriff's Department. And I really do think we're unique in being able to present this data. So I wanted to do it live in front of you one more time. For those of you who don't know what drug use forecasting, that didn't get taken out. That should be in the earlier slides. Okay, so background. For those of you who don't know, back in 1987, the National Institute of Justice started a study called Drug Use Forecasting. It transitioned to ADAM, Arrestee Drug Abuse Monitoring, and at its height, it was done in 35 cities across the United States. They stopped the funding of it, and we were the only site to keep it go uninterrupted through our current year, 2021. We kept it going during the COVID pandemic by working closely with the Sheriff's Department and doing some virtual interviews. We were at probation also, doing those virtually with youth booked into juvenile hall and using safety protocol. But what makes it unique is it's the only data measure that you're going to get that has an objective measure of drug use. We have a lot of self-report measures where we may go into the schools and ask youth about what drugs they've used, or you do household surveys, but we actually are able to get a urine sample. We make it very clear that that urine sample is voluntary. Somebody doesn't have to give it to us. It is not tied back to them in any way. We have been subpoenaed over the years asking us to be able to tie it back to a certain individual, and we don't want to get involved in that. We want people to share honest information. And because we have local funding for this, we've been able over the years to add additional questions. So the data I'm going to share with you today is based on our adult data that we have, and a little bit more focused. We've seen a lot of overdoses that have come up, the increased use of naloxone. And so I wanted to share some statistics for that in particular with you today. So when you look at our data, it's important to consider how our 2021 sample differed from past samples. The numbers were a lot lower than they have been before, and who was booked into jail has changed considerably since 2020, with that really the booking numbers going down. Since the pandemic, last year we had about 3/4 were males. Previous to that, it was about 2/3 of the interview sample were males. They were slightly younger. The average age in previous years was around 37. And we've also had a greater proportion of individuals who are identified as Hispanic. Last year, Hispanic Latina was 40%. In the previous pre-pandemic year, it was around the third, 33%. Whites made up about 48% previously, and they were only 34%. So there were some differences there. But the most startling differences are really who's booked into jail, and law enforcement could speak to that. There was a lot of changes from the state and local of who was getting booked into jail. So our sample here, almost half were booked for a violent offense. In the prior year, pre-pandemic, it was 29%. Property crime went from 15% to 23%, and drug offenses made up about a third prior and only 13%. Did I go one too many? No, I did go one too many. What happened to the other slide? Huh. Okay. I'm going to go to this. I'll do this slide first. So what this slide shows is the percent of adult males and females since 2000, when we improved the sampling data, who tested positive for any substance. And the substance we test for are marijuana, cocaine, crack, opiate, so it could be heroin or prescription opiate, methamphetamine, and PCP. And in 2021, the males who were booked into one of our local adult detention facilities was the highest it's been in 22 years. 83% tested positive for at least one drug. You can see a big drop for females. It's down to 60%. And I really think that reflects the changes in booking and who was getting booked into jails during this time period. Because traditionally, you could see for a number of years, females have actually tested positive at a higher rate. I think that goes to many of the females traditionally aren't arrested for violent offenses. More people who are getting booked into jail were in jail for violent offenses. So I think that's an interesting trend. This is a slide I've presented before, but I think it really does as we talk about public policy, drug use. We see many homeless individuals out on the street. I know Care Court legislation was just signed. How do we get individuals to get the help that they need? I was here talking about the Prop 47 evaluation. The county just got another Prop 47 grant, and just the challenges of getting individuals who may have been using meth for 20 years into treatment when there is no requirement to get into treatment. How do we get people to take advantages of the services that are out there? And we've had a lot of legislative changes over the past decade. AB 109, which passed 11 years ago, transferred a lot of responsibility from the state to locals in terms of housing individuals in local state jail, being under probation supervision instead of parole supervision, the length of time one would be under supervision. Prop 47 made a number of felonies, or that could be wobblers, felonies, or misdemeanors in terms of drug charges and property offenses. Prop 64 legalized marijuana. And when Prop 47 passed, I thought, well, I wonder if we'll see fewer people positive in jails for drugs because they may not be getting booked in jail for drugs. And as you can see, our percentages have continued to increase over time. Again, in 2021, it was our 22-year high for males, and it was a 20-year high in 2019 up until the pandemic happened for females also. So even though there's been a lot more openness and maybe not mandated treatment, we're still seeing a large number of individuals in the justice system with these underlying needs of drug use. We know there's mental health issues, also about a third report that they've been diagnosed. And many people might be treating themselves, self-medicating with drugs also. So again, just want to really highlight the underlying need for many individuals who are still in our justice system. Another thing I'd like to highlight is that regardless of what somebody's booked for, they're still likely to be positive for a drug. And actually, ironically, those who are booked for a drug offense had the lowest positivity rate of about 2/3. 67%. This is not statistically significant, but you can see that 3/4 of those booked for a violent offense, almost 4 in 5 for a property offense, and almost 9 in 10 for those for another offense tested positive for at least one of those 5 drugs. And that there was also variation in testing positive for multiple drugs. Marijuana, one thing I'd like to note too is, because many times people say, well, marijuana is legal in the state of California. 2/3 of those who did test positive for marijuana tested positive for another drug in addition to marijuana who are booked into jail. So many of these individuals who are coming in with substance use issues, it's not just marijuana they might not be positive for. And when it did become legal, we added questions about how did you obtain marijuana? Because we were interested to see, did making it legal stop the illegal trade? And we've heard a lot about the gray market of dispensaries that people might think are legal but really aren't legal. And you can, we did find that most of the people we talked to who are in the justice system, 2/3, say that they have bought marijuana in the past year in multiple ways, not just one way. And then when you look at the data on the left side of the chart, we ask what are all the different ways you've obtained it in the past 12 months, and getting it from a recreational dispensary is the most common, but you can see 62% also still say that they're still buying it on the street. Many times they'll say it's easier, it's cheaper, they don't want to pay the taxes, they know where to get it from. And then when we ask what's your preferred method, going to a recreational dispensary is the top choice, noted by just over 1/3. They like the variety often, or being able to get things like the edibles, but that still over 1/4 still say that they would prefer to get it on the street. So just I think it's interesting when we look at this from a public policy perspective that just making it legal doesn't make illegal trade go away. Meth has been the drug of choice for many individuals in our justice system. We also had a 22-year high for adult males testing positive for meth. Again, remembering that our sample of who we talked to has changed probably over time because females have traditionally tested positive. But you can see that in 2021, 58% of males tested positive for meth, 44% were positive for meth. For opiates, we have had much lower rates than other jurisdictions when other jurisdictions were doing the study and we could compare to them. We had some differences again with the males and females. Males went from 11% in 2020 to 7% positive in 2021. Females went up slightly, 6% to 9%. But I thought this was interesting, and as we know, and I defer to law enforcement who may have some more up-to-date information if they want to add anything here, but we know there is some polydrug use going on with individuals using meth and potentially opiates, but also fentanyl could be mixed into meth, which is something that I'm hearing more about. And so we looked at the percent of individuals who were positive for opiates, and I just showed you those percentages overall, but you can see those who were positive for meth, 12% of them were positive for opiates compared to 2% of those who weren't positive for meth. So I can't say if that's polydrug use going on, or is it possible that some of the meth that they used also had fentanyl in it, which would mean that they tested positive for opiates. So just an interesting finding there. We'd never noticed that before in our data.
Dr. Burke, what are opiates?
Opiates or it could be, and you're going to catch me on the difference between opiate and opioid, and I don't think we have any medical doctors here, so I don't know if law enforcement wants to speak to that. It could be
Just high level, just
so you know how there's prescription drugs that could be like Oxycontin,
yes,
or
okay,
you know, some of those.
family.
So it could be a prescription opiate or heroin.
Got it.
Methadone would test positive for opiates.
Okay, thank you.
And then just some other data. We heard a lot during COVID, was it harder to get drugs across the border and stuff? And I had heard through anecdotal sources that maybe some of the illegal drug distributors were trying to make people think that it was harder to get drugs across the border so that they could raise cost during the period of the pandemic. But we did ask individuals traditionally, how easy is it to get? And you can see that in 2021, we had higher percentages saying that it was actually very easy to get meth, to get heroin. Prescription drugs were actually down to get those illegally, which I know that we have a prescription drug abuse task force. So that's a positive that that's gone down. We do ask individuals, we had heard historically that many people were getting hooked on prescription drugs and then switching to heroin because it was easier or cheaper. Of those individuals who said that they had ever used heroin, 1 in 4 said that they had been hooked on prescription drugs before. And about 3 in 5 of those said that they switched from the prescription drug to heroin because it was easier to get, it was cheaper. And there's a Vicodin, Percocet. We also asked people, we added a new question about counterfeit pills, which was something that our advisory board had asked us to ask about counterfeit pills being more available on the market. So really not even real prescription drugs. And 37% of those who had bought pills from someone said that they did think that they bought something that was counterfeit. So again, the message to get to our kids, you don't know what you're getting, even more than, younger generations. Doctor shopping, we found an interesting gender difference there, and this could be related to, again, the sample and how it's different of who's being booked into jail, but 13% of males and 1% of females said that they had doctor shopped for prescription drugs. Asking about, would you buy a drug that contained fentanyl? When we first asked this question a few years ago, most people did not know, a lot of people didn't know what fentanyl was. And the good news is people do know what fentanyl is now. And overall, only 12% of the arrestees said that they would buy a drug knowing it contained fentanyl in it. But there's a difference by those who were positive for meth or heroin looking for that fentanyl high. You can see that 18% of those who tested positive for meth said that they would buy a drug that contained fentanyl, compared to 5% of those who weren't negative. And then 59% of those who were positive, that should say opiates, said that they would buy a drug that contained fentanyl, compared to only 8% again of those who were not. So again, many individuals who may be addicted to heroin are looking for that greater high. And if you have anything to add from your experience with the adult population, that would be great. Another thing too, so again, there's the issue of people buying fentanyl intentionally, but also it being in a drug that they didn't know about, and then that can often lead to overdoses, which we've seen with increasing numbers. We asked individuals, have you ever used a drug that you thought contained fentanyl, but you weren't told it contained fentanyl, depending on, and you thought that because of how it reacted, the reaction it caused. Overall, 1 in 3 of the arrestees we talked to, 31%, said, yes, I think I used a drug in the past year that contained fentanyl that I didn't intentionally buy. But when you look at the percent positive for meth, it was 45%. And when you look at those who were positive for opiates, it was 75%. So they weren't even intentionally buying it, and they think that it wasn't the drugs they had bought. Naloxone is a big topic of discussion, and we asked individuals who had ever overdosed, had they had naloxone administered to them, and you can see 2/3 say that it has, which is much higher than it used to be. And I think this is really an important statistic. The 61% said it had been administered more than once. And how do we really try to engage people into treatment and use opportunities when there are overdoses to try to make sure that they know their resources that are out there? I know there's different things like sobering centers and different types of ways of meeting people's needs in the community. But, when someone gets naloxone and if they're not, they're just let go. So it's like, how do we figure out how to, when there's multiple times that they're getting it, to engage with them? The most common administrators, 2/3 were fire and EMS. So if the chief has anything to add there, 38% did say friends, and then 21% law enforcement. So that's some of our data. Wish it was better news, but it's still an issue out there. And I guess if it was easy, we'd have it solved by now. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Really appreciate the information. Wow, a lot to digest in that. Are there any comments from members of the dais? See no questions just yet. I'll go ahead and go to public comment.
Tim Bellish.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me activate his mic.
Can you hear me? Push the button, sir. Yes? Oh, I turn it on. Can you hear me now? Yes. Thank you, chairs, committee members, staff, visitors, and the sheriffs and chiefs who are in attendance. My name is Dr. Timothy Bylash. I am a resident of Del Mar, San Diego County, and board certified in obstetrics and gynecology, practiced for 31 years, a fellow of the American College of OBGYN, and currently licensed in the state. I really appreciate this careful report and the way it was presented. I think I would echo that data is very, very helpful. Now, from a medical perspective in law enforcement, sometimes we have different uses of this type of data. And I'm all about keeping accountability for individuals, but getting this aggregated results gives us some effectiveness for it also. I just want to highlight a few things from my 31 years of career and taking care of mostly women, but the issues of addiction versus habituation, that once you get habituated to a drug, you often have withdrawal. And as a physician, sometimes we see patients who are adapting behaviors, self-medicating in some ways because they don't get access to care or they're coming off of other drugs. So I wanted to mention something I wasn't aware of until recently, that there is a alcohol test through the urinalysis. And if you're doing a urine test for these other substances, I would offer a suggestion to consider screening for alcohol in these persons. Very often, these are all just compensating type of drugs. And particularly in this environment, we have so many microbreweries. We often don't think of alcohol as a participant in the problems that people develop, but it has chronic problems as well as acute problems. So an alcohol test for urinalysis test with the others, I think might be something to consider. The data was very, very interesting. I would be curious if any of the people who are arrested or test positive are receiving assistance in some form. We've gone through a COVID epidemic, and I would take a guess, I don't know if it's sure, but many of the women and children might be receiving more assistance. And I'm always concerned about the economics that are involved with dysfunction. And so if they were getting more assistance, this might be some support that those kind of programs are helpful in reducing these kind of problems. One other thing I might mention, yes, I have a little time. I would consider tramadol an entryway drug into drug addiction for opiates. It is currently, I believe, a Schedule IV drug. And in my practice, I see it given as if it is considered non-narcotic. The DEA, I think, mischaracterizes it. It's given often by mid-levels as well as PAs in the emergency rooms on an emergency basis, so I would consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bylash. Appreciate you. Seeing no additional hands raised from the dais, and we did hear our public comments. This was for information only. We thank Dr. Brick for the information. Thank you all for being here. Are there any additional members from the public?
No public comments.
All right. Any other last announcements from our committee members? Anything? All right, with that, our next Public Safety Committee meeting is currently scheduled for Friday, October 21st, 2022 at 1 p.m. We are adjourned, and it is now 2:27. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you. Oh.